Test, test, test. Check, check, check. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Test, test, test.
Testing. Boy. Good afternoon. I'm Roger Bagnall, the president of the American Philosophical Society, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to Philadelphia, or back to Philadelphia for those who came to La Jolla, and to the spring general meeting of our members and guests. We have around 300 people registered for the meeting this week. It's a tremendous turnout, and we believe we'll be at something like SRO tomorrow afternoon at the peak. So make sure you get your seat. We have 23 members attending their first meeting. They'll be formally inducted into the society over the next few days. They are the only ones wearing pink name tags, so you'll be able to tell who they are. That's the only breach of our nullo discrimine rule on name tags. So please welcome them. As always, I am instructed to remind you to turn off your cell phones, or at least make sure they are silenced. As always, we begin our meetings by standing to remember the members who have died since our last meeting. I ask you to please stand while I read their names. J. Michael Bishop, on March 20th, 2026, at age 90, elected in 1995. Barbara Black, on January 20th, 2026, at age 92, elected in 1991. Barry Bloom, on March 18th, 2026, at age 88, elected in 2004. David Botstein, on February 27th, 2026, at age 83, elected in 2008. Paul Ehrlich, on March 13th, 2026, at age 93, elected in 1990. Benedict Gross, on December 19th, 2025, at age 75, elected in 2017. Anthony Leggett, on March 8th, 2026, at age 94, elected in 1988. Christopher Sims, on March 14th, 2026, at age 83, elected in 2012. Michael O. Rabin on April 14th, 2026 at age 94, elected in 1988. Samuel Tier on January 3rd, 2026 at age 88, elected in 2004. Robin Weiss on February 27th, 2026 at age 86, elected in 2018. Benjamin Widom on January 23rd, 2025 at age 97, elected in 1993. Thank you. We now move to a happier part of the meeting, the induction of new members.
Great. We're good? Yeah. All right. Will David A. Bell please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President. Mr. President, I have the honor to present David Bell, Sidney and Ruth Lapidus Professor of History at Princeton University. He previously taught at Yale University and Johns Hopkins University, where he also served as Dean of the Faculty. He is also the former director of the Shelby Coulomb David Center for Historical Studies at Princeton. A specialist in the history of the Enlightenment and the Age of Revolutions, Dr. Bell has written 7 books on topics including French nationalism, Napoleonic warfare, and the connection between the rise of modern democracy and charismatic strongman leaders. Dr. Bell is the current president of the Tocqueville Society, a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a corresponding fellow of the British Academy.
By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. One more photo. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Will Dr. David Card please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President. Mr. President, I have the honor to present David Card, a class of 1950 professor of economics at the University of California, Berkeley. He taught previously at the University of Chicago and Princeton University and has held visiting appointments at Columbia, Harvard, UCLA, and the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. He is the former director of the Labor Studies Program at the National Bureau of Economic Research. He is a member and former president of the American Economic Society. And in 2021, Dr. Card was a co-recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for, and I quote, his empirical contributions to labor economics.
By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations. Please step over here.
Thank you. Will Dr. Michael Harris please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President. Mr. President, I have the honor to present Michael Harris, Professor of Mathematics at Columbia University and Professor Emeritus at the University of Paris. Dr. Harris's work focuses on the relation between 2 approaches to number theory, the Langlands program, a reinterpretation of the Galois groups of number fields using methods borrowed from mathematical physics, and Grothendieck's theory of motives, none of which I know about, which approaches the same topics through topology. For his works in mathematics, Dr. Harris has received numerous awards, and he's also a member of the Academy at Europa, the American Mathematical Society, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the National Academy of Sciences.
Over here. By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations. Please step over here.
Will Dr. Carl June please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President? Mr. President, I have the honor to present Carl June, the Richard W. Vague Professor of Immunotherapy at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. A physician-scientist, Dr. June also serves as Director of the Center for Cellular Immunotherapies and as Director of the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. June is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and spent his final year of medical school studying immunology and malaria at the World Health Organization in Switzerland. He is the scientific founder of Excite Therapies, as well as T-Immunity Therapeutics, and the June Laboratory produced the first gene therapy approved by the U.S. FDA. Dr. June is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Academy of Sciences, and the Institute of Medicine.
By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations. Please come over here.
Got it. Thank you. No, she's okay. She's not in my. She's not here. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. No, that's me. I got it. Yeah. All right. We're good now. Will Dr. Charlene Eiffel please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President? Mr. President, I have the honor to present Charlene Eiffel, founding director of the 14th Amendment Center for Law and Democracy and the Vernon Jordan Distinguished Professor in Civil Rights at the Howard University School of Law. A civil rights attorney, Ms. Eiffel is the former president and director counsel of the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, and she has elevated the LDS profile and expanded its influence over the last decade, forming national conversations about race and civil rights. Ms. Eiffel was awarded the American Bar Association's Thurgood Marshall Award in recognition of her commitment to voting rights and universal equity. She is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and is recognized as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world in 2021.
By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations.
Congratulations, thank you. Will Dr. Margaret King please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President? Mr. President, I have the honor to present Margaret King, Professor Emerita of History at Brooklyn College and the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. She is the senior editor of the series The Other Voice in Early Modern Europe and editor-in-chief of Oxford Bibliography's Renaissance and Reformation. She's a scholar of the Italian Renaissance and the classical tradition. She works in the social and cultural history of early modern Europe, women and learning from the 14th century to the 19th century, and the history of childhood. Dr. King's first book, The Venetian Humanism in the Age of Patrician Dominance, was awarded the Howard R. Mararo Prize for the best book in Italian history by the American Catholic Historical Association, and her book, The Death of the Child Valerio Marcello, received the American Historical Association's Helen and Howard R. Mararo Prize.
By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations. There you go.
Great, thank you. Will Sir Paul Nurse please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President? Mr. President, I have the honor to present the President of the Royal Society, Paul Nurse, also Honorary Life President of the Francis Crick Institute in London and Chancellor of the University of Bristol. He has served twice as President of the Royal Society and also Chief Executive of Cancer UK and President of Rockefeller University. Sir Paul was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 2001, and along with Leland Hartwell and Tim Hunt, for, and I quote, discoveries of key regulators of the cell cycle. His studies of yeast revealed a special gene that plays a decisive role in several cell cycle phases. Sir Paul later identified a corresponding human gene. Sir Paul was knighted in 1999 and made a Companion of Honor. He has been recognized with the French Legion of Honor and the Japanese Order of the Rising Sun. He's also served on the UK Council for Science and Technology for 15 years and was a chief scientific advisor for the European Union.
By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations. There we go. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Will Dr. Gene Robinson please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President? Mr. President, I have the honor to present Gene Robinson, Director of the Carl R. Weiss Institute of Genomic Biology and the Swan Lund Chair at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. In his research, Dr. Robinson has led the effort to sequence the honeybee genome using genomics and systems biology to study the mechanisms and evolution of social life among Western honeybees and other species of bees. His work examines the function and evolution of behavioral mechanisms that integrate the activity of individuals in a society. Dr. Robinson has been a frequent contributor to scientific advisory boards and organizations, and is also a member of the National Academy of the Sciences, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the National Academy of Medicine.
By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations.
Thank you. Will Dr. William Sutherland please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President? Mr. President, I have the honor to present Bill Sutherland, Professor of Conservation Biology and Professorial Fellow at the University of Cambridge. Through his work as an ecologist and conservation scientist, Dr. Sutherland has explored connections between behavior and population ecology using game theory models of decisions that individuals make. These models can, in turn, be used to predict the sequences of future states, such as agricultural change or climate change. Dr. Sutherland is the former president of the British Ecological Society, a commander of the Order of the British Empire, and a fellow of the Royal Society.
By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations.
I like the tie. I didn't notice before. Will Avina Van Dieshoek please come forward to the President's desk to sign the roll book and then receive a formal welcome from the President? Mr. President, I have the honor to present Avina Van Dieshoek, Professor Emeritus of Molecular Astrophysics at Leiden Observatory and the Scientific Director of the Netherlands Research School of Astronomy. Conducting her research from the Leiden Observatory, Professor Van Dieshoek looked at the formation of celestial bodies, examining the conditions in space that are not generally present on Earth, particularly dealing with ice-cold glass clouds. She was awarded the Kavli Prize for Astrophysics in 2018 for her, and I quote, contributions to observational, theoretical, and laboratory astrochemistry, work that has elucidated the life cycle of interstellar clouds and the formation of stars and planets. Professor Van Dieshoek is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Royal Astronomical Society, the Leopoldina Academy of Sciences, and the Royal Dutch Academy of Sciences, and the American Philosophical Society.
By the authority and in the name of the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge, I do admit you a member thereof. Congratulations. Please come over here.
Thank you.
That's it. Yep. Okay. It is now my pleasure to turn the podium over to Jacqueline Barton, Vice President of the Society, to introduce our first speaker, Sir Paul Nurse.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the spring meeting of the American Philosophical Society. I'm Jackie Barton. I'm a chemist at Caltech and a vice president of the APS, and I'll be chairing this afternoon's session. Our plan this afternoon is to have 4 talks by leaders in science policy from across the globe, followed by a roundtable on learning across borders, learned societies, and international exchange. We'll have 2 talks, then we'll have an intermission, and then we'll have 2 more talks in the roundtable. So let's begin. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Sir Paul Nurse. He was just inducted, having been elected to the APS in 2025, so I don't want to be too repetitive. On the other hand, I'm going to be a little repetitive given his level of distinction. Sir Paul Nurse is president of the Royal Society in London, Honorary Life President and Principal Group Leader of the Francis Crick Institute, and Chancellor of the University of Bristol. A geneticist and cell biologist, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2001, along with Leland Hartwell and Tim Hunt, for the discovery of protein molecules that control the division of cells in the cell cycle. Among his many activities, in 2003, he became president of Rockefeller University in New York City, where he continued his work on the cell cycle. And in 2011, Nurse returned to the UK and became the first director and chief executive of the UK Centre for Medical Research and Innovation, now the Francis Crick Institute. Currently serving as his second term as president of the Royal Society, Sir Paul will be one of our hosts this summer for our joint meeting of the APS and Royal Society. Sir Paul is a frequent scientific advisor, sitting on the UK Council of Science and Technology for 15 years, advising the British Prime Minister and Cabinet, and serving as Chief Scientific Officer for the European Union. He was knighted in 1999 and has been recognized with the Order of the Rising Sun and the French Legion of Honor, among others. He was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and is a foreign academician of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. In 2022, he was appointed the Order of Merit. Nurse has said that good scientists must have passion to know the answers to the questions that interest them, along with good technical ability and a set of attitudes, including intellectual honesty, self-criticism, open-mindedness, and skepticism. Sir Paul's talk today is titled Promoting Knowledge from Learned Societies Across the World. Please join me in welcoming Sir Paul Nurse.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here to speak to you, especially as it's my first meeting at the Society. I decided, as you could see from the title, to consider the important roles that learned academies and societies play in promoting knowledge and understanding of the natural world and of ourselves, both in their own countries and across the world. But before doing that, I want to say how pleased I am to have been elected a member of the American Philosophical Society, especially on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence of the United States. It's a real honor for me. Given that 250th anniversary, I'm struck by the fact that an author of that declaration was, of course, Benjamin Franklin, an extraordinary Enlightenment figure, shared by the two organizations, both the Royal Society and, of course, the APS. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1756, having previously founded the American Philosophical Society in 1743. Now, both these societies, from their inception, were concerned with promoting and improving natural knowledge, roughly what we now call science. The American Philosophical Society was interested, I quote, in all philosophical experiments, in the nature of things that tend to increase the power of man over matter and multiply the conveniences of pleasures of life. 80 years earlier, Christopher Wren had said much the same thing, that the Royal Society, of which he was president, should concern itself with advancing knowledge, profit, health, and the conveniences of life. So our two organizations have long been aligned in terms of both people, objectives, and the pursuit of knowledge for the benefit of humanity. Academies of scientific communities across the world come in all shapes, in all sizes. Some societies are more active in public affairs, some in outreach, others focus largely on the recognition simply of scientific and academic achievement. Those like the Royal Society are independent of government, while others are in effect government agencies. This, of course, has an impact on resourcing, but also on their ability to speak truth to power. Most recently, here in the United States, under some attack, especially with the government-supported National Academy of Sciences. This is shocking for me, at least, because for nearly a century, the United States has been the leading science nation in the world, defending science and its ability to generate reliable and trustworthy knowledge, a position that now, extraordinarily, is under challenge. Academies have to push back. They have to use their authority and use their skills to do it well. Both the Society here and the Royal Society are academies that are largely independent of governments, and so can speak truth to power. Indeed, have a responsibility to speak truth to power. More on this later. But first I want to tell you a story about a very early connection between America and the Royal Society in the early 18th century during colonial times. A soon-to-be Fellow of the Royal Society, Zabdiel Boylston, 1679 to 1766, who lived in Boston, performed the first recorded inoculations, or more precisely variolations, against smallpox in the Americas. The treatment, which required introducing smallpox matter into the human body by incision, was used as a folk medicine in sub-Saharan Africa. And the procedure was probably taught to both Boylston and the Puritan clergyman Cotton Mather by an enslaved black African man, or Onesimus. Based upon the knowledge and his experience, who almost certainly had inoculated himself, Boylston conducted variolations during the Boston smallpox outbreak of 1721, and it saved lives. However, he was threatened by the authorities and was evenly imprisoned by the city fathers because of these activities. His family was subject to violence. He was obliged to inoculate his patients in secret. Vaccinations have always had opponents, ladies and gentlemen, but you might have thought that things should have got better in the last 300 years, but apparently not so. However, Boylston reported his work to the Royal Society and as a consequence was subsequently elected to the fellowship. The Royal Society's secretary, James Durin, then began to gather statistical information on the outcomes of smallpox inoculation, published this information in the pages of the Society's journal, The Philosophical Transactions, very similar, of course, to the APS journal as well. This established that you had more chance of surviving smallpox if you had been inoculated, avoiding this often fatal and disfiguring disease. These early types of inoculation were promoted by Sir Hans Sloane, who became president of the Royal Society after Isaac Newton. And this is an early example of how independent, learned societies can undertake and promote evidence-based science, in this case, in the fight against smallpox. We need to honor that. We need to follow that tradition. We continue to need today to promote high-quality, evidence-based science and its applications for the good of humanity, pushing back on the mistruths and bad policies which are becoming increasingly common in our age of intolerant, opinion-based social media bubbles and populist politics. So why is it that science is such a reliable way of generating systematic evidence, generating knowledge of the natural world and ourselves? I think it's largely because of the way it is done. Science is based on a range of attributes and ways of working, incidentally not unique to science. They are often found in the humanities as well, but which are combined together in science in a very effective way. Science is based on reliable and reproducible observations. It generates accurate descriptions of how the natural world behaves. Such evidence forms the bedrock of science. The impetus to make observations and to carry out experiments often derives from curiosity, natural in children and frequently persisting at a high level later in the lives of many scientists. Perhaps that's why scientists are often rather childish, I've always thought. From study of these observations and these experiments, regularities and patterns can be recognized, a process emphasized by Francis Bacon in the early 17th century. These in turn lead to the generation of ideas and hypotheses that explain the workings of the world. This whole process requires an attitude of mind that the natural world is in principle understandable in a rational manner, a process which had its origins in classical Greece. It's also one of society's defenses against uninformed political opinion. Imagination and intuition are important in generating scientific ideas and hypotheses, which these then need to be tested with more observations and more experiments. This way of working has been well described by the philosopher of science Karl Popper, who emphasized the importance of trial and error in science. He argued that a scientist considers the data obtained by observations and experiments relevant to a natural phenomenon of interest, and then, through leaps of the imagination and of intuition, develops a framework to consider that data, generating hypotheses to explain the phenomenon. Such hypotheses are then further tested by using them to make new predictions, which are examined by further experiments and observations. And if the new data, do not support the hypothesis, then it's either rejected or it's modified, and the new hypothesis tested by further observation and further experiment. So science proceeds by trial and error, with unsatisfactory hypotheses being rejected through a process of falsification. Popper went further to argue that falsifiability is the principal way of distinguishing science from non-science. And an important implication of this view of how science works is that scientific knowledge evolves and therefore is often tentative, especially at the beginning of investigations. It's only after repeated testing that it becomes more secure. Now, science is also influenced by the way that scientists behave and interact with each other in a community. Scientists, like all academics, should be open, honest, rigorous in their thinking, and skeptical. Skeptical especially about their own ideas. An effective science community should be interactive and collaborative and encourage the constant challenge of data, ideas, and hypotheses, but in a courteous manner. Mr. Trump, listen to that. It is the overall strength of evidence and argument that matter in science, not the hierarchical authority of the scientists involved. The combination of these attributes and ways of working produces a methodology that underpins science and which is very effective at generating reliable knowledge. And in my opinion, the same principles underpin democracies, which also require open, honest, and rigorous thinking, reliant on good evidence. Politicians in an effective democracy should be interactive and collaborative, encourage the challenge of data and their ideas, and always respect the pursuit of truth. Science thrives best in good democracies, and democracies thrive best when underpinned by good science. This is why the present situation is so dangerous. It attacks science, and it also attacks democracy. It's also important to realize that advances in science are global in their impact. The scientific knowledge obtained is universal in character. It does not respect differences between countries and cultures. It aims to be applicable throughout the world. An implication of this is that scientific research is truly a worldwide activity, supported and studied throughout the world, with globally transformative effects. Science thrives on the permeability and fluidity of ideas and of people, on ready exchange and on mutual respect. Cultural differences do result in different ways of doing science, and that can be complementary and it can be reinforcing. But ultimately, the processes of science are common across the globe. And another consequence of this is that because science shares so many common values across nations, it provides a diplomatic tool to break down barriers between people and nations, a tool that is perhaps insufficiently used in our diplomatic missions, but is fully understood by our learned societies and academies. And if science is attacked in one country, and it becomes difficult for their academies and societies to defend science, then their colleagues in other countries must come to their aid. The Royal Society is considering organising an annual meeting of academies and societies from around the world in London to do exactly that, to give support and to provide a safe haven for debate and to speak truth to power. I want to finish by considering how science can continue to bring about improvements in the human condition. A critical condition that is required is a healthy relationship between science and society. We need to ensure that science is being used for the public good rather than the reverse. Ultimately, making good decisions about the use of knowledge based on science depends on societies with the right values that encourage debate, that are democratic, as I've just argued. For science to play its proper role in society, it requires a public at ease with science and a society that can cope with the complex decisions involving science. I am optimistic. I'm an optimistic person. And I'm optimistic that in the future, societies across the world will increasingly see the value of science in bringing about revolutionary changes to our knowledge and revolutionary improvements in society and the human condition. Science is truly one of the most long-lasting revolutionary activities known to humankind, and properly used, will continue to bring great benefits to us all. Our learned societies across the world have key roles to play to defend this and to ensure that science is properly protected and is then used for the public good. Thank you. thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Outstanding. I'm feeling better. We'd be happy to take questions.
Of course.
And please state your name and where you're from. I think we have one here in the back.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Maria Jason, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. So I, for the last 3 years, was chairman of the genetics section at NAS. And so when all of this turmoil was going on. And what I learned from that, or what I think I've learned from that, is that NAS is not really an independent body because, first of all, much of their funding is through contracts with the government. And if that were to fall apart, if the president would stop all of that funding, that would really be problematic for the mission of the NAS. The other kind of basic point is my understanding, too, is that there is a connection in terms of, for example, the building, the NAS building, is probably government property. And even the organization itself, I believe if Trump wanted to just get rid of it, he may be able to do that. So we all felt, and this is, I'm sure, a major reason for Marcia McNutt's reluctance to say very much, at least early on, that she could compromise, her words could compromise the very existence of the NAS. So I think that surprised all of us that, you know, we consider ourselves ideally an independent institution that can speak truth to power, but in practice, it's not really the case.
Yes, well, I have a lot of sympathy with what you've just said. The NSS is a very powerful organization. It is well funded. It was, of course, set up by Abraham Lincoln. And it all made sense, didn't it? I mean, we have the US built on values that would value science. We just did not imagine that something like this would happen. It does suggest that one needs to have in place some checks and balances that just make this more difficult to happen. I think that's important. But also it emphasizes that other organizations, like the one here, like the Royal Society, which are independent, then have a special role to play. It's not an easy role because it's, of course, one where one is trying to convince the public of the importance of what it is that we are doing. And so it has to be handled with great care so that we're not labeled as being an out-of-touch elite and all those sort of things that are thrown at us. But we have a special responsibility when we have the freedom from government, and we have to use it. But let's not despair. Let's not despair. I think it's very easy to do that. The NAS, I'm sure, is, and NSF as well, of course, is feeling under enormous pressure at this moment in keeping, the funding agencies, NSF and NIH, are under a very considerable pressure. But I think the US is strong enough to weather this storm. And I honestly think that if we just despair, we will play into the opposition. And it's very important not to despair. That's the only thing I would say.
Yeah. Another question? Yes.
Thank you so much for that.
Can you wait for the microphone? I'm a bit deaf, I'm afraid.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful address. I'm Sherilyn Eiffel, a new inductee. I wonder in your morphology about scientists and how they must work. They must tell the truth. They must be skeptical of their own views, and so on and so forth, that you didn't include ethical in that list. And the reason I raise it, and it's subsumed within the other things that you've said for sure, But breaking it out as a separate thing strikes me as something powerfully important in this moment, in part because ethics have been so under attack in democracy at large. And when ethics are under attack, even the debates are not being undertaken on an ethical playing field. And so they're not real debates. And I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to the role of ethics among scientists, but also in democracy.
Well, I'd assumed it because it's obvious that it has to be ethical. It follows from all the other things, really, that I actually said. It can be a little complicated because ethics can be influenced by opinion in different cultures and different ways of working. So it is a little bit more complex in because people can have different opinions about what is ethical. And so it's one reason I don't put that primary, because it is more complex. But of course we have to behave correctly, and ethics is part of that. But if we go too much in that direction, we may find ourselves in territories where opinion begins to matter more, and that, I think, also has its dangers. And ethical opinions can change over time. Science can too, because it's challenged by evidence. Ethics is changed by more of what is the public opinion at a particular time. So we have to be aware of that as well.
Thank you. I think we're going to take one more question. We're still going to have time for questions during the roundtable, so save them up.
Thank you, Paul. That was wonderful, as always. I heard you interviewed on television about 20 years ago, and the question had to do with the future of science in China. And for many of the reasons you just gave, you thought it would be difficult for China to really do robust, innovative, cutting-edge science as opposed to being fast followers. But as you say, scientists also look at whether the data do or don't support their hypotheses. What is your view now in terms of what's happening in China and innovation that's currently happening in China?
Yeah, not such an easy question to answer, actually. I think 10, 15, 20 years ago, the position is China was moving in a more liberal direction than it has done in recent years. And I remember having the Premier of China speaking at the Royal Society, and I gave a speech there which had some echoes of what I just said here about how good science prospers in a democratic environment, which is what I sincerely believe. And he got up and stated that he completely agreed with that. And they needed to move China more in that direction, because it would make, for various reasons, but one is it would mean their science would be better. We need to remind perhaps in present leaders how important that is. In my experience talking in China at lower levels, in scientific leadership certainly, that they fully understand that. And you heard I'm an optimist. It will happen eventually. It will happen eventually, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, our second speaker today is Rosaura Ruiz Gutiérrez. Sadly, Dr. Gutiérrez won't be here live today because of government obligations in Mexico. But given modern technology, Dr. Gutiérrez is going to be joining us through Zoom. She won't be participating in the roundtable, but if we work it right, she'll be able to answer a few questions after her talk. So let me introduce her. Our second speaker today is Rosaura Ruiz Gutiérrez, head of the Ministry of Science, Humanities, Technology, and Innovation for the government of Mexico, appointed to this position by President Sheinbaum and a member of President Sheinbaum's cabinet. Dr. Gutiérrez is a biologist and leading advocate for both the teaching and public dissemination of Darwinism, evolutionary theory, throughout Mexico and Latin America. A proponent of the historical and philosophical study of evolutionary theories, she founded the Group for Historic, Philosophical, and Social Studies of Science at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, her alma mater, where she serves as professor and director of the Biblioteca Darwinia. She's carried out visiting professorships at the University of Basque Country and UC Irvine. Throughout her career, Dr. Gutiérrez has dedicated herself to strengthening Mexico's scientific institutions and higher education. She's been integral to the governance of UNAM, served as president of the Mexican Academy of Sciences, secretary of Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation, and supported the creation of 2 universities. Dr. Gutiérrez was awarded the Medal of Merit in Science from the Congress of Mexico City and the Ayala Medal from the Hannah and Francisco Ayala Chair in Science, Technology, and Religion. Her talk today is titled Darwinism and the Making of Modern Mexico. Dr. Gutiérrez, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for your presentation. Good afternoon, everybody. I am delighted to be here. I would like to thank President Roger Bagnall and Vice President Jacqueline Barton of the American Philosophical Society for the invitation. And thank you, all of you, for being here. As Jacqueline said, I currently serve as the Minister of Science, Humanities, Technology, and Innovation of the Government of Mexico. I am proud to serve under the first female president and to lead a new ministry that reflects the importance of the humanities for scientific development. I also thank Hannah Ayala for her friendship and for being here. My work builds on questions I explored over several years with Francisco Ayala on evolutionary biology and its philosophical meaning. This lecture examines the role of Darwinism in Mexico, not only as a biological theory, but as a way of understanding life, time, and change. As you well know, in the 19th century, Darwinism changed how we understand life. It replaced teleological explanation with a secular view of change and transformed how we see life, forms, and the human being as part of nature. The central question here is, how did evolutionary ideas become part of the way of how society understands itself? To answer this, I analyze Darwinism as science, as a set of concepts, as an ideology, ideas that set political, institutional, and educational action. In the late 19th century, processes of national reconstruction, industrial growth, and state consolidation changed the link between knowledge and social organization. In North America and Europe, new political systems appeared alongside growing infrastructure, administration, and public health. Scientific knowledge became closely linked to managing population and regulating social life, working both as description and, as I said before, as an ideological tool. Mexico was part of the same context, but it emerged from the period of deep instability marked by the liberal reform and the violent reform war in 1857-1861. During these civil conflicts, liberals, led by Benito Juárez, fought conservative and Catholic forces to separate church and state and secularize the nation. Although the liberals triumphed in 1861, the defeated conservatives sought European support, provoking a French intervention and the imposition of Emperor Maximiliano of Habsburg. After the final defeat of this French-backed regime in 1867, President Juárez continued to rebuild the country. In that same year, he founded the Natural Preparatory School, something is equivalent to high school now, to form a unified and rational, scientifically informed civic population. Notably, the institution students embraced Darwinism almost immediately. The Liberal Republic ended with Porfirio Diaz, took power in 1876, starting a regime that became a dictatorship and lasted 30 years. His long rule created a strong central state and promoted modernization through railways, foreign investment, and tighter government control. At the same time, this brought increased inequality and social tension, leaving workers, peasants, and indigenous people behind. In this context, evolutionary ideas moved beyond biology and became powerful ideological tools. They were used to explain the social order and support political decisions, and were often used as the ruling elite to give a scientific explanation for extreme inequality and authoritarian rule. In the end, the growing discontent with this oppressive condition led to the Mexican Revolution in 1910, an armed and social uprising that overthrew the regime. This is the historical context for the argument I will present. When Darwinism reached Mexico in the 1870s, it entered a field already shaped by positivism. Liberal elites used the idea of Auguste Comte and Herbert Spencer to organize knowledge, education, and government, placing science as the center of social order. Education was not neutral. It formed elites, disciplined the population, and promoted order, progress, and control. In this context, Darwinism first appeared in Mexico not as a scientific practice, but as a set of ideas used in political and philosophical debates. Biology was still developing, so in the 1870s and 1880s, evolutionary theory was discussed mainly by intellectuals, especially lawyers, not scientists, not biologists. Liberals defended it as the basis of secular education. Justo Sierra, a leading intellectual and key promoter of that would be later become the most important university in Mexico, the National Autonomous University, played a central role on his defense. He used evolution to teach history, challenge religious authority, and promote a view of social change based on gradual development, linking evolution to order and reform. Conservatives, especially the Catholic press, rejected it as a threat to religion and to the distinction between humans and animals, describing it as a degrading materialistic idea. The conflict was about who defines truth and society. It was only in the beginning of the 20th century that Darwinism genuinely became part of scientific work in Mexico, primarily through the efforts of Alfonso Herrera. He was the first Mexican biologist to apply evolutionary theory directly to scientific research, moving it away from just philosophical debate. At the same time, evolutionary language continued to be used for political purposes. It supported reform and modernization, but also justified inequality. Social differences were presented as natural, and race a scientific concept. Indigenous populations were included only in subordinate roles, often justified by a supposed biological inferiority. During the Porfirian dictatorships, this logic became stronger. The state promoted development but relied on repression and inequality. Evolutionary language justified exclusion and limits on participation, reinforcing domination even within liberal thought. In this context, Darwinism was an ideological tool for organizing society, linking evolution, progress, race, and power. Its circulation shaped both inclusion and exclusion and set the condition for its later use during the revolutionary period. In the early 20th century, the Porfirian dictatorship entered into crisis under conditions of land concentration, labor exploitation, political exclusion, and extreme poverty. Those tensions were not only material, but also ideological. Evolutionary language, once used to justify order, progress, and racial difference, changed its meaning as social conflict intensified. From 1910, the Mexican Revolution brought together peasants, workers, and intellectuals, transforming the state in its ideas. It redefined land, labor, people, and nationhood, challenging property concentration and social injustice. Its impact extended beyond Mexico. It became a reference point in Latin America and influenced political thought in contexts such as the Spanish Republic, especially in debates of land reform, secularization, and public mandate. The revolution did not eliminate evolutionary language. It redirected to concepts such as adaptation, progress, and development. This relation remained central, but were linked to cooperation, social change, and state action. At the same time, race and population remained key issues. Racial difference and classification continued, reorganized through the idea of mestizaje, the mixing of races. Education became a key instrument for this process. Different political projects agreed on the need to shape the population, and the school became a central space for forming citizens, transmitting knowledge, and reshaping social values. In the following section, examine this process in concrete terms, focusing on how evolutionary language was used to organize race, justify social differences, and shape national development through specific ideological projects. In the late 19th century, Vicente Riva Palacio, a key reform intellectual, congressman, and governor, introduced evolutionary ideas into historical interpretation within a liberal national context. Based on Darwin, he argued that indigenous population represented a form of biological advancement, pointing to traits such as reduced body hair and change in dentition as signs of a more advanced stage. His view set an important precedent. It linked evolution to race and supported that adaptation to the environment could produce biological advantage for the indigenous people. It was them and not Caucasian descendants who were the superior race. This idea was later developed into a more explicit political project. This became evident in the work of Andrés Molina Enriquez, a key thinker of the revolution and the agrarian reform linked to the creation of the 1970 Constitution. 1917 Constitution. He built a model connecting race, evolution, nation, and state formation, arguing that the central problem of Mexico was the organization of its population in biological, social, and territorial terms. In Los Grandes Problemas Nacionales, The Great National Problems, 1909, he applied Darwin's and Haeckel's ideas to human population, presenting race as the result of long-term adaptation to the environment and linking body, territory, and social organization. This position promotes integration, but also reproduces racism. It ranks populations by their capacity to adapt while presenting these differences as natural, only this time in favor of indigenous people. At the same time, change is possible through mixture. Here again, mixed race becomes central. Mixed race is both an idea and a political project. It aims to resolve social fragmentation by producing the mestizo, defined as best adapted to Mexico's conditions and as basis of the nation. Molina Enriquez argues that indigenous populations have greater strength because of long-term adaptation to to their territory, while Europeans are associated with higher capacity to act and transform their environment. From this, he claims that in process of mixture, the best of each race will prevail. Mixed race becomes the means to transmit these advantages. The mestizo is seen as the most viable type, able to control territory, solve national problems, and sustain the state. It also reflects global debates on race and racism. Like other nationalist ideas of the time, it uses a biological view of society. Unlike European ideas that value purity, the Mexican case values mixture. A prime example is José Vasconcelos, the great Mexican philosopher and Minister of Education of the post-revolutionary period. In the Cosmic Race, 1925, he rejects white supremacy and argues that mixing white, black, indigenous, and Asian peoples will create a new fifth race. One of the stronger transformations of evolutionary language appears in the work of Ricardo Flores Magón, a revolutionary journalist, key figure, and founder of the Mexican Liberal Party. In his interpretation, Darwinism turns into a tool for revolution. Biological ideas become instruments to read society and guide action. Magón's position is a form of anarcho-communism based on a materialistic view of nature and evolution. He began as liberal opponent of the dictator Porfirio Díaz, but moved toward anarchism through engagement with Marx, Proudhon, Bakunin, Reclus, and Kropotkin. Within this shift, evolution changed meaning. It no longer supports slow reform. It demands revolution. Magón is explicit. People like Justo Sierra, who defend gradual change, are cowards. They accept injustice and delay transformation. For him, rupture is necessary. An armed struggle becomes inevitable when oppression blocks change. Evolution and revolution form a single process. Human history moves through change and rupture in the same time. And revolution is part of evolution, not something outside it. What is interesting is that years later, Viola itself also criticized that extreme graduality of Darwinian theory. In the 1970s, Stephen Jay Gould and Richard Lewontin, who were Marxist biologists, challenged the idea that change must always be slow, continuous, orderly, and guided by adaptation. In this sense, it is as the problem returns from society to biology, from social revolution back into evolutionary thought itself. Back to Magonism, another key idea in Magón's position of his attack on dominant Darwinism, positivist and Spencerian ideas, and use evolution to justify order, control, and inequality. Magón exposes this clearly. This is not science. It is the power defending itself. The use of competition and natural selection to justify exploitation is political, not scientific. Against this, he places cooperation at the center. Inspired by Kropotkin's mutual aid, cooperation is not more language. It is a real force of life, present in nature and society. In this view, indigenous communal practices are not backward, but effective forms of organization. This directly challenged racism, which had treated indigenous population as inferior. Communal life becomes proof that cooperation works. This also changes the meaning of fitness. In biology, fitness refers to the ability of an organism to survive and reproduce in a given environment. In Magón, it is no longer about individual success or domination, but about the capacity to cooperate and organize collectively. The focus shifts from the individual to the community. From a materialistic view, of nature did he draws in simple conclusion. If no one creates the earth, no one can own it. Land must be collective. His struggle is not only Mexican. The Mexican Liberal Party operated in United States and formed part of a global anarchist networks. It belongs to an international fight against capitalism, the state, and organized religion. The most radical forces did not win the revolution. The project that took power was more moderate and later formed the Institutional Revolutionary, the famous PRI, which ruled for 7 decades. Magón represents the radical edge of the revolution, not its final outcome. This case also shows something larger. As a global phenomenon, Darwinism was used by very different ideologies. It was used by Marxists, by liberal reformers, and also by Nazis. The same language of evolution served both emancipation and domination. During the Porfirian dictatorship, evolutionary thought was used by the state to justify and maintain social order. In the late 19th century, as seen in intellectuals and politicians such as Riva Palacio and Molina Enriquez, it organized the nation, placing the indigenous people at the center as the most adapted population. With Flores Magón, evolution becomes a tool for revolution. In education, evolutionary concepts enter institution and shape ideas. The Mexican case shows that Darwinism did not remain only a theory on nature. It became a way to understand and organize society as it moved through conflict, institution, and political projects. Darwin's theory of evolution through variation and natural selection belongs to the history of biology. Darwinism, as a way of understanding and organizing society, belongs to the story of modernity. Thank you very much for your attention. ¿Las preguntas?
Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. I think we're going to see if we can take a couple of. Can we see if we can take a couple of questions for you? Let's try.
Thank you.
Questions? There's a question there. Again, please be sure to say
Está
who you
desfasado.
are and where you are from.
Toda la pregunta, pero no la hice.
Mary Miller, Getty Research Institute. Thank you so much, Dr. Ruiz, for giving us this rich cultural and philosophical history of Mexico. But I wondered if you could explain quickly, because when we go through Justo Sierra and then to Flores Magón, it seems as though there is a kind of strong current of really and then really through Vasconcelos in The Cosmic Race of 1925. How are these ideas then both captured and suppressed by the PRI, by the Party of Institutional Revolution? And how did these ideas become quashed or really diminished by the time we get into the 1930s?
Could you hear that?
¿Cómo el darwinismo?
¿Lo puedo preguntar en español si es mejor?
¿Y por qué desapareció?
These ideas were the Darwinism was used in the 19th century, not in the 20th century, I think. In 19th century, Darwinism it entered in science, and in Mexico with in that story we separate that Darwinism in the new era with the PRI, with the new party, that they in some way they won the revolution and they took the power and they formed the PRI. They don't use the Darwin ideas. That changed in Mexico. The most important part that I tried to explain was that in the 19th century was very important for the introduction of Darwinism in philosophy and in political. I maintain that Darwinism was very important in the 19th century in revolution, in the Mexican Revolution, in the previous stage of the Reforma War. I don't think this continue in the past century. This is the idea that I maintain.
Another question? Perhaps I can ask one related to our roundtable. That is, what's your sense of the importance of the politics in the United States today? How is that affecting things in Mexico? I couldn't help it.
Now, the relationship between Mexico and United States is very important. And all that happens in United States affects Mexico, obviously. So, but now I think we have a very good relationship among the politicians of United States and in Mexico. I think the government of Claudia Sheinbaum has very good relationship with the President Trump. We have differences, obviously, Mexico has differences, but I think we are discussing and we have, in general, a good relationship among these governments, the Mexican and the United States government.
Good. Well, thank you.
That would be my answer.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again. So I think now we're going to take an intermission, and then we'll have two more talks by scientific leaders. So we will come back again at 2:40.
Pulled some of the documents in our vitrines. We've pulled some of the documents from our collections that relate to the talks we just heard. Adriana, do you want to share some of these?
Hi, everybody. So over on the vitrine over here, we have a couple of documents related to metaphors used both in terms of describing artificial intelligence as well as Darwin's ideas about evolution. So take a look over there, including an edition from Mexico. So please take a look. And then in this vitrine here, we have some documents related to science and democracy from around the world, many from the APS's own history. So come check that out as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And our director of press is in the president's room and ready to record a brief lightning talk to be used by APS. So please don't hesitate to go back and do a lightning talk. We'll see you back at 2:40. Need the bell. Can we start to reconvene? Somebody have the bell? Can we please reconvene? Wonderful. If we can now reconvene and continue with our program. We're going to continue with our next two speakers, also leaders in key scientific learned societies, one at the Academia Sinica, Taiwan, and the other at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS. Then after the talks, we'll sit down and have a roundtable discussion. But first, I need to remind all of you to please turn off your cell phones. All right, so now let's hear from James C. Liao, currently president of Academia Sinica, Taiwan, and distinguished professor emeritus at the University of California, Los Angeles. Dr. Liao is a pioneer in metabolic engineering and synthetic biology, and he's been recognized for his outstanding research in the biosynthesis and production of higher alcohols, such as isobutanol from sugars, cellulose, waste products, waste protein, and or carbon dioxide. His work, spanning 3 decades, has established foundational principles for modern metabolic engineering. He was named a White House Champion of Change for innovations in renewable energy and has been recognized for his contributions to renewable energy with the Italian ENI Renewable Energy Prize and the U.S. National Academy Sciences Award for the industrial application of science. Dr. Liao is an elected member of the National Academy of Science and the National Academy of Engineering. Dr. Liao has served as president of Academia Sinica since 2016, and his talk today is titled Science in the Era of AI, an Evolutionary Perspective. Dr. Liao.
Well, thank you for the great introduction, and it's my great honor to be invited to APS. This is my second time to come to this building to talk. As Jackie said, I spent most of my career trying to do genetic engineering in bacteria using our designed circuits. But very soon, we found that evolution is a much better way to do it. So that's why I began to pay a lot of attention to evolution. And then 10 years ago, I took on the role of president of Academia Sinica, where I had a chance to get access to many new technologies. And of course, AI is one. And I'm sure everybody talk about or hear about AI at least 3 times a day. But I'm going to talk about a slightly different perspective. How can we use evolutionary ideas to look at AI? So, AI is not new, most people will say. It has a turning point starting from around 1997, about almost 30 years ago, when IBM's Deep Blue defeated the Russian world-class world chess champion. But that wasn't that spectacular. I don't know for what reason, but actually it took off 10 years ago when I became the president of Academia Sinica. I remember very clearly in 2016 when AlphaGo defeated a Korean professional player. And that was the first time in history a machine defeated human chess player. And Go was considered the most challenging game that human created. Of course, people may disagree, but that was a big success. And only a year later, additional AI came along called AlphaZero. This time, it didn't have to learn from human. It started from the rules and learn by itself. And now, no human is able to defeat it in any conceivable way. Okay? So at that time, human already lost the whole game. Then we thought that was it. That was the spectacular surprise of AI. And then 2022, I remember that was the end of COVID. Okay, if you still remember COVID, that happened. And OpenAI launched the ChatGPT. That was really shocked the whole world. It can use natural human language to do many, many things that we think only human can do, including rewriting text, summarizing key points, answering questions, and in an intelligent way, at least seemingly intelligent way. And it can write speeches. By the way, my speech is not written by AI. And it can design computer programs. So after 2016, a lot of people tell their kids, go learn computer science, learn programming. Only 5 years later, they don't get jobs anymore. So this is how fast AI advances. How did AI advance so fast? Can I use a philosophical argument? It's a transforming from quantity to quality. What do I mean by that? AI is not new, as you know. The neural network has been going on for many decades, but it used a very small number of parameters. At that time, it can only do simple classification. And then thousands of parameters. It can do clustering. Millions of parameters. It can do simple predictions. And all of a sudden, to billions of parameters, it can do content generation. And now people are trying to scale it up to trillions or more than trillions of parameters and trying to do something what they call artificial general intelligence. Some people may argue that we already have it. Others will say, no, it's still very far away. But at least, as of 2 years ago, artificial intelligence, AlphaProof, AlphaGeometry 2, already achieved the level that most people can ever achieve. Okay, that is, they perform at the level of International Mathematical Olympiad, silver medalist. I think unless you are a mathematician, most of the questions there, we don't even understand what's going on. Okay? So it's very, very impressive achievement, only a few years. So if you summarize how fast AI advances, okay, this is my attempt. In September 2023, this is a little bit less than a year after ChatGPT came out. AI is like a gifted child. Oops, here. It's about 10-year-old, and it learns whatever it is taught. And 6 months later, it becomes 15-year-old. It not only learns, it perfects whatever it is taught. Another 6 months later, it reached the silver medalist level that I mentioned. A few months later, people claim that it's like a PhD candidate, and not a regular PhD candidate. It's an elite PhD student. Okay? It goes beyond whatever that is taught to do. And many of the key findings in human history are found in those ages. I think many of the Nobel laureates did their best study during that time. So a 20-year-old elite PhD student says a lot. In the same year, Nobel Prize was given to people who helped develop AI in both physics and in chemistry. And now people predict that maybe in some year, 20-something, Nobel Prize will be awarded to AI itself without human intervention. I don't know whether that's possible, that's consistent with the Nobel's will or not, but at least the level of achievement is totally conceivable. So, why it is so successful? And why is it advancing so rapidly? Here I attempt to give an evolutionary perspective. It may not be the only explanation, but at least it's interesting perspective. Let's look at biological evolution. Before Darwin, people thought evolution was perceived through certain leaps called saltations, and is guided by a creator, whoever that is. And it's a deliberate design, just like we design a piece of machine. So a creator create human beings or create any species. That was before Darwin. Except, well, not except, a little bit before Darwin, Lamarck created this theory called use and disuse. He said adaptation is a purposeful change. For example, a giraffe needs to eat fruits on the tree, so it uses its necks. And that trait can be inherited in different generations. Of course, later on we know that's not true. So, in simple terms, biological evolution before and after Darwin can be summarized as follows. Lamarck said it is a purpose-driven adaptation. There's a purpose that evolution happens. Darwin said, no, it's not a purpose. It's a selection-driven through a random variation. All the variations are pre-existing and it's random. And whatever fits better, that will enrich in the population and survive eventually. That's how Darwinism says. So in simple diagram, put into more engineering style, biological evolution happens this way. There's a random variation that create different individuals in the population. Whoever that survive better in that particular environment will populate the population and continue to reproduce and continue this process. And this is a simple principle that governs everything, at least according to Darwin. And the cycle time in biological evolution is about hours to decades or maybe hundreds of years. In terms of human beings, maybe a little bit even longer. So how can evolution explain this very rapid progress in AI? So if you look at biological evolution, actually it doesn't stop there. The natural biological evolution select fitters that survive better in a particular environment. Very soon, it selects someone who can design a variation for another species. And we know that because we eat that every day. That's called GMO corn. Okay? We learn how to design a variation. Of course, we don't do that one shot. We do that many, many shots. And then some of it may work. Some of them don't work. So this design variation break away from simple Darwinian evolution through genetic engineering. And there's an objective, there's a purpose why we do this. And whatever grow better is selected. And this process feedback into the evolution of human beings. Whoever who can do that can survive better. Okay, so this is an additional layer of evolution theory, which I call the artificial evolution. Is not really biological evolution anymore. Okay? Typically through genetic engineering. And there are many, many examples, plants, microbes and plants. Those are the things that I do most of my work. For example, this is my recent work. We designed an artificial cycle that fixes CO2. We call the MCG cycle. That's working together with the native biological cycle called CBB cycle, Kelvin-Benson-Bressium cycle. After we put it in, we found that it allowed the plant, Arabidopsis, to grow 3 times larger, 3 times more CO2 fixation, and more seeds, and so on and so forth. So this is an example where human deliberate design something that can improve over the native random variation, which is not a surprise. We all know that. How does that explain AI? Well, AI does almost exactly the same thing, except it doesn't change genes. It changes algorithms. And it has a specific objective, and still go through this kind of cycle. And instead of the different generation, its cycle time is very fast. Each generation, hours, days, or maybe each step is milliseconds to seconds, depending on how you count each cycle. Okay. And this algorithmic designed variation can iterate very fast in a way people call reinforcement learning. And I will argue that this reinforcement learning is one of the key reasons why AI advanced so fast. Basically, it can learn by itself. Okay? And even though there are some small differences between reinforcement learning and biological Darwinian evolution, but the basic idea is the same. Okay? You give some change, and then select the filter, either by human scoring or by specific objective. Whatever that does well, then you move on. You move on. And this cycle can be at the level of parameters. And that's a matter of a few milliseconds. So the cycle time is the milliseconds, but real improvement may be hours to days. Okay, so that allows AI to move very fast. So this artificial evolution basically introduced a design component into this evolution scheme instead of just random variation. And the rate of evolution depends on cycle time, population size, and your design quality. And so if you look at all the things that can be put into this evolutionary scheme, including AI itself, proteins, medicine, microbes, animals, and societies, as we just heard. The cycle time for AI is extremely short, for society is extremely long. Population size is the opposite. AI, you can have many, many populations. If you change parameter, you can call it a different individual, and so on and so forth. That's why AI advanced very fast, society evolved very slowly. Okay? So from this context, you can understand why things can move that fast. So what's the limitation of AI? It's limited by existing data, at least by and large. And it has something called hallucination. Okay? When machine does something wrong, we call it hallucination. If human beings do something crazy, we call it creative. That's the difference. And it has some accuracy, and it has bias. Or people will say they can do things, but it's not true understanding. So that's the limitation of AI. So in spite of this, how can scientists take advantage of AI? And many scientists are already doing this routinely. You can do literature search, you can summarize, here. You can summarize, you can do data organization, data analysis is almost semi-automatic, okay? It can do coding, computation, simulation, it can do mathematical derivation, actually very complicated mathematical derivation, not just simple ones. And eventually, it can do self-driving labs, just self-driving cars. A lab can run by itself, okay? At least semi-autonomously. And it can also interact with human, allow scientists to learn new field, even though it's not very advanced, but it's very good to get into a new field. And it can optimize. Optimization is the best thing that AI can do. It cannot extrapolate very much, but it can interpolate, find the optimum point very well. And it can do novelty check, and some people even use that for hypothesis generation. Like I said, if they hallucinate, sometimes may hallucinate in the right way, we call it creative. So how will AI change science? We predict that many technical jobs will be upgraded. Programmer will become solution designer, not just programming. Bioinformaticists a few years ago was in scarce. Now, they have to become in silico biologists, not just running the code, writing the code. Computer can do that. Okay? Computation, math, derivation, simulation, these had to become specialized professionals. And scientists will have to focus more on discoveries, theories, and mechanisms to explore new territories, knowledge gap. Okay? That's the area that AI cannot do. And then, more importantly, what should we teach students? Typically, we teach students what we know, but AI can do that better than us. AI knows better than we do. So this is really a question that we have to think very hard. In my opinion, we have to teach fundamental concepts, ability to detect AI problems, okay? And cross-examination from all angles. That means we have to rely on interdisciplinary knowledge, not just one field. But having said that, specialist training still are important, because somebody still need to take care of those AI. But we will differentiate into many small sectors. On the other hand, how will AI inspire science? We keep criticizing AI does not really understand. That's what we all said. We all laugh at AI. They just memorize things they don't really understand. But maybe we should rethink what do we mean by understanding. Is it a conscious understanding or is it motivated understanding? Okay, those are more philosophical questions that deserve our attention. And more importantly, what can we learn from machine understanding, even if we don't admit that it's real understanding, but that's machine understanding? Can we learn from artificial neural network to inform us about biological neural networks? That would be important. Finally, can AI evolve independent of a human? So far, we talk about AI, it's software. But we know that software can easily integrate it into robots. And now, this is a scary picture. It has all the elements that it can evolve by itself. It can reproduce, it can evolve. Okay? The cycle time in software is hours, or even some people can say even seconds. With hardware, maybe months. Okay? And hardware can exist in extreme conditions that human cannot. So it can fit in our society much, much better. But what is hard for AI to evolve? At least for now, we don't know AI has motivation. Maybe somebody can pretend, can program something that it looks like motivation, and AI doesn't have a sense of collective benefit, at least not yet. It doesn't have emotion, empathy, or love. And it doesn't appreciate arts, literature, and music. And you may wonder, maybe they don't need it, but that's something else. And most importantly, it doesn't appreciate values. So a question is how AI will transform the future of humanities. So you ask this question, this is AI's answer. Okay. Oops. Intelligence becomes externalized. Okay. So we should look for other things. The bottlenecks move from information to meaning. Human identity becomes less stable. This is AI admits these are the future. And this is my answer, at least tentative answer. Evolution becomes partially designed, not just random variation. Selection is engineered. Feedback is accelerated. And human and machines will co-evolve. We cannot live independent of machines. Humanities move from being a product of evolution to being a participant in directing evolution. Okay. And what should humanity do in the face of fast-evolving AI? This is a very serious question. If we're not careful, AI can take over, AI plus robots. Here is my suggestion. We have to develop legal, political, and cultural constraints to safeguard human values. For example, we've done that before. The nuclear weapons, we have a non-proliferation agreement, and that's dated back in 1970. And biological weapons, even before biotechnology was very advanced, we already had a Biological Weapons Convention in 1975 to ban biological weapons. And human germline modification, even though we don't have a real legal means to ban that, but it's a general international consensus not to do that. So we will have to develop something along similar lines, okay, to ban humans to develop AI to harm humanity. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Scary to think about, huh? Now, we're going to only be able to take 2 short questions. Or some.
Thank you very much for this inspiring.
And please say who you are.
I was a student of John
Turn on.
Hello?
Okay, turn on the.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was a student of John McCarthy in the 70s, who invented the word artificial intelligence. And at that time, in the Stanford, we have discussed many of these issues. One thing that I miss from your presentation, what we should teach students, greed. Greed is very dangerous and pushes people to do very unethical things. So please put that in.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah, that's what this society needs to work on. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for that talk. And I'm glad you put the third direction, which is that robots and AI together are a threat. And I guess as an evolutionary biologist, Richard Lenski, Michigan State University, how the as you create agents that have an independent existence, why would they respect any limits that we might put on them, especially as they become more and more advanced over time and become increasingly independent?
Yeah, so this question is similar to developing biological weapons. Okay, one can imagine with today's technology, you can evolve a virus that defeats all possible cure. Okay, so in principle, human can do that, but we ban that. So this is something that we need to develop. And how to do that, we have very short time to figure out.
Yeah. Let's take one more question. Harvey, if you... I'm coming. I don't want to end on that note.
Well, thank you. Harvey Feinberg, Harvard University. The question I have is about Project Genesis in the US and its emphasis on inserting AI into all of science. I wonder if you could comment on how you see the prospects for the success and what additional concerns, if any, beyond those you've already articulated, you would raise in connection with this immediate initiative.
I think it is inevitable that scientists will embrace this new tool. You cannot ban scientists from using this. And Genesis, as far as I know, is an attempt to organize this effort to put together all the available data and metadata to feed into AI, to help scientists. That aspect are all good. The problem is who is going to control the value aspect, okay? So that requires scientists and natural scientists and social scientists come together to work out a scheme to do this carefully.
Thank you, Dr. Liao. And he'll be back in a little bit. But first we have our last speaker, Sudeep Parikh, Chief Executive Officer of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, and Executive Publisher, Science Journals. Dr. Parikh has worked at the nexus of science, policy, and business for 2 decades and became CEO of AAAS in January 2020. He obtained his PhD in macromolecular structure and chemistry at the Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla and went on to serve as a vice president at Battelle, a major research and development organization, followed by managing director at DIA Global, a multidisciplinary organization for healthcare product development. From 2001 to 2009, Parikh worked with the Republican leadership of the U.S. Senate Appropriations Committee to negotiate budgets for the NIH, the CDC, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, among others. He was at the forefront of major science policy debates around embryonic stem cell research, cloning, disease surveillance, bioterrorism, and cybersecurity. He's also worked passionately on efforts first to double and now save our NIH budgets. Dr. Parikh is an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Council on Foreign Relations. He's also received multiple public service awards. His talk today is titled Science Before and After the Rupture. Please.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Jackie. And I have to say that it's really a privilege to get to speak in this room with this audience. And I was recognizing it as a privilege, and then I realized I was last after these 3 speakers, and I thought, this is a hazing. This is not a privilege. And so I have to say to Paul, I'll say that I'm going to repeat many things he said, except for with a Southern accent, which doesn't sound quite as good. And then James, holy crap, you scare me. We have a lot to do in science. I agree with you. It's an exciting time and a scary time. So obviously my talk, Science Before and After the Rupture, is a reference to Mark Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum, in which he talked about the fact that, in his terms, geopolitics had reached a place where we had passed through a rupture, not a transition, and that there was no going back to the before. And that's going to be my thesis to you today, is that science And I'm going to talk about what that rupture is. I think you're going to take some guesses. But there are other things as well, that science has gone through a rupture, and that there is not a time of going back. And that is unfortunate, because I will tell you that the first thing that I want to talk about is the fact that we live in wondrous times. And in fact, when I was looking at the list of folks who are going to be in this room, I realized that many of you have contributed to these wondrous times. And so when I look up at this screen, up in the top left is a depiction of CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing, which, again, the idea that we can cure disease is not one, when I first became a biochemist, that we talked about. We didn't say the word cure. In fact, my boss told me never to say the word cure because we couldn't do it. And now the truth is we can. What an extraordinary time to be alive. When I look at that picture in the middle, those are the methane-covered mountains of Pluto. We know that there are 2-kilometer-high mountains of water ice on Pluto, and that there's methane dust sprinkled on top. What an extraordinary thing for primates on Earth to know. What an extraordinary thing. On the top right is the Atlas detector at the Large Hadron Collider, where we understood more and more about the subatomic particles that make up our universe in a way that is that our ancestors never would have imagined. The bottom left is an Earth-observing satellite. We know more about the universe, this planet, and ourselves than we've ever known before. This is an extraordinary time to be alive. And the bottom right is one of my favorites, which is the product of LIGO, which several people in this room had something to do with. And what this is telling us is that there are gravitational waves that as we sit here, our reality is stretching and shrinking right through us. What an extraordinary thing. It's a way to observe the universe in addition to visible light and X-ray light and UV light. What an extraordinary time to be alive. And so I wanted to share that with you because part of this is me celebrating that. And part of me is this grieving a little bit because the structures that we built over the past 80 years that created this are changing. They're changing right before our eyes, and they've gone through a rupture, and I want to talk about that. So first, the before the rupture. Paul, you referenced Ben Franklin and the APS and the Royal Society. I was at the Royal Society in January, and I snapped this picture. This is part of the propaganda tour at the Royal Society for all Americans. As an American, when you go, they always want to show you two things: the death mask of Isaac Newton and this letter from Ben Franklin to the Royal Society, telling us that international collaboration, open science, has been a part of this for a very long time. Scientists don't want to hide their discoveries. They want to share them with the world. Ben Franklin wrote this letter, and I wish you could read it because his personality comes through, which is wild to me. He's funny in a letter. I'm not funny in person. So this is a wonderful thing. But it started at the beginning of our history, but then it really takes shape in the 1940s. And I'm going to breeze through this part first, the before, because many of you know this story. And so in the 1940s, before Vannevar Bush and the Endless Frontier, the U.S. federal government funded science sporadically, created something that looked like the national laboratories to do the Manhattan Project, and it was really about national security. Called that the 1940s. By 1950, after the Endless Frontier was written by Vannevar Bush, it had really two simple, profound ideas. The first is that we should be investing in science in a time of peace, just as we do in a time of war. That was actually profound, as a federal government, as taxpayers. The second was that we should do that research, we should do that science in the same place that we educate. Those two things should be intertwined. Education and research should be intertwined. That was simply yet profound. It's a profound idea. And it made it to where universities become a very big part of this scientific enterprise. And it leads to industry, and it leads to national security. And the whole idea of Endless Frontier, if you go back and read it, and I know many of you have, the very first thing is it's a workforce document. It's about jobs. It doesn't mention peer countries or global competition. That didn't exist. The US was 50% of the GDP of the world. It was about jobs in the United States and the workforce. And so this is what's created. Now, there's a long backstory to this. In fact, Vannevar Bush was very disappointed with what came out of the Endless Frontier. Truman actually vetoed the first attempt at implementing the Endless Frontier. So don't think that things have ever been easy. And don't think that things didn't always require politics. They did. Now, the reason why I've showed this is because I sometimes think that Vannevar Bush gets too much credit. Because after 1945, it turns out the world didn't stop in terms of the structures of science. We built around this. We built up organically around it. We started adding to the ways that industry and reflected back to our communities. And I'll go through this in more detail in a different talk. But what I just want to show you is that it gets more and more complex. We start adding international students to the story in addition to the US students. We start adding state and local governments to the story. We add different ways of matching capital with risk, not just federal funding, but philanthropy and industry. We have different ways of thinking about the translation from the national laboratories and labs to national security. And all of it comes together in this big, giant, organic thing that's grown up. And so my point here is it's complex. It's complex and it's been built over time on top of the thing that Vannevar Bush invented for us. And the last bit of it is that it all goes back to paying taxes back into the coffers. It's a wonderful, virtuous cycle that we built over 80 years, in which, as we create those discoveries, and they lead to growth in the economy. The growth in the economy leads to larger coffers. The larger coffers leads to more increases in funding, and so on and so forth. A wonderful, virtuous cycle. Now, the rupture. Now, I don't want to pretend like that was all perfect. In fact, many of the incentives and the structures that have been created, as they take place over time, does what any set of structures and incentives does. It starts to strain under those incentives. Our way of doing academia in research and education entwined together meant that we were creating clones of ourselves, many, many clones of ourselves, many of them needing jobs outside of academia. We had to figure out what to do with that. We also had strains in terms of the way things are funded. It turns out that when you have compounding growth, the numbers get bigger and bigger really fast. And now it's approaching in the federal government $200 billion a year of investment in science and technology. That's a big number. And so all these things are adding together. So of course there are strains on that system. But then there's the rupture. And here I've just put some X's over some of the parts of this system that have been either attacked or taken apart in the past 2 years. On the left, international students, the challenges. I was in Brazil recently, and they were telling me that in terms of Fulbright scholars, instead of sending 900 a year to the United States, they accepted 900 this year. 500 didn't want to come. That is a tragedy. That is a tragedy, and it's something that never has happened before in my lifetime. So, and it's not just Brazil. I've spoken to other countries. I've spoken to Panama. Other countries are feeling the same way. So international students have become challenging for us to attract into the United States. US students, we've taken apart many, many of the programs that actually, first of all, broaden participation, or second of all, find those extraordinary students and talents and bring them into the system and nurture them and support them. We've taken some of those apart. Our universities. I don't have to tell the people in this room that several, and they're on a list, are under attack, and under attack in a very specific way, such that funding has been cut, then come back on, then cut, then come back on. You can't run a railroad that way, much less a scientific enterprise. And so these things are under challenge. The philanthropies. The tax on endowment was a real scare to the philanthropies in this country. And philanthropy has become a giant part of the investment in science and education in this country, because we're about to have the greatest transfer of wealth ever known. And that transfer of wealth is going to create more opportunities for philanthropy. So this is under pressure. These things are under pressure. Add on top of this, James talked just briefly about the pandemic. The pandemic changed a lot as well. We shouldn't underestimate the break in society that came from the pandemic. There has been a break. And so all these things come together, and they do form a rupture. It is a rupture very much in the terms of science, as Mark Carney talked about geopolitics. And the reason why I can say this is because I look at the National Science Foundation. Now, there are folks intimately involved in leading the National Science Foundation in this room. The National Science Foundation has been dismantled. And I hate to say that. I grieve for that. I grieve for that. Over half the staff is gone. Now, that's one thing. Staff at a federal funding agency is one thing. But then, a lot of the programmatic efforts, again, that are used to build up our scientific workforce, took a huge hit last year. In fact, the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, and I'll come back to it in a second, was cut in half. It's cut in half. These are our most promising graduate students in the country in every discipline. It It's cut in half. Now, there's a better end to that story, not end, but there's a next chapter of that story, which I'll tell you in a second. But we are damaging that infrastructure at the National Institutes of Health. We've watched the slowdown of funding leaving that agency, despite the best efforts of folks to fight the political battle to ensure that there was a bipartisan consensus for money for the National Institutes of Health. And so we're in this place where there is bipartisan consensus. There's a large majority of the American population that still believes in funding American science. In fact, it's well over 80%. Well over 80%. It is not partisan to want to fund science in this country. Now, there are a few people, they happen to be in really important places, that have real problems with it. And we have to work on that. Now, I'm going to bring up something that as I think of those breaks, it reminds me of this thing that I saw. Has anybody heard of the Mandela effect? Nobody in this room goes down YouTube rabbit holes like my teenagers. The Mandela effect is this idea that before the Large Hadron Collider was turned on, that we used to spell Mandela with 2 L's, and that the fruit of the loom, your underwear, that logo had a cornucopia in it, and now it doesn't. And that's caused by the idea that the Large Hadron Collider, when it was turned on, created parallel universes, and that we went down the wrong one. We went down the wrong one. Now, I don't know about the physics of that, and I'm a lowly biochemist, but what I can tell you is it sometimes feels like it. It feels like the rupture did happen right around that time as we started. And so what are the results of that? You see things, and I apologize, this all comes from Science because I'm the executive publisher of Science. I can't help myself. Borders on the insane. New NIH policy on funding foreign scientists stirs outrage. This is the idea that there was a pause in international funding from the NIH last year. A pause that was really just about stopping completely, all at once. Now, I've raised this with Jay Bhattacharya. I will tell you that Jay's a friend. I consider him a friend. He's a decent human being. And he honestly believes that funding has restarted again now through direct awards as opposed to sub-awards. But I keep going around the world asking. I was in the UK last month, and I asked, and I haven't found anybody yet that has that direct award. And so whether or not the rhetoric is that we continue international collaboration, the facts on the ground are that there are not. And so we have completely eroded trust in this international collaboration, this international strength of the United States of science. PEPFAR, the head of PEPFAR, the chief science officer of PEPFAR, resigned this week in protest of what's going on with the PEPFAR program. This is a huge win for the country, for the world. PEPFAR is something that, really in the history books 500 years from now will be remembered as a way that the United States saved millions of people. Started by President George W. Bush, probably his greatest achievement in my estimation. And it's currently in tatters. Simple things like this idea that attendance at global meetings that are based here in the United States, that the audience and the attendance has plummeted. And I can tell you this from firsthand. We had an award that was given to a German scientist, and he didn't want to come to the United States. This is the kind of challenge that we're facing right now. This is a rupture. It is a rupture. It also talks about, it's about immigration. I wrote an editorial about immigrants helping make America great. This is an incredible challenge for us. This nation has such a superpower in the way it draws on talent not of 350 million people, but of 7 billion people. It's an extraordinary thing. It's extraordinary. The crossroads of science that's been created, whether by will, by idea, or by luck, has driven this country to incredible heights. And we are in the middle of dismantling it. And friends around the world ask me, and this is what hurts the most. I was in India a couple months ago. They asked me if this apocryphal quote, I know it's apocryphal. I can't find a place where Churchill actually said it. But you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. People are asking me, are you going to do the right thing? Are you going to find your voice? Are you going to find your truth? And so I come to you to say that 2 paths for our future are possible. 2 paths are possible, at least 2 paths. But neither is inevitable. They're about agency. And this is where I'm going to echo Paul. It's about agency. It's about the agency of ourselves as scientists. We have part of the solution. We're not the whole solution. But about science, we are the solution. And so what are we going to choose? Are we going to choose to keep our institutions strong and the enterprise weak? Or are we going to choose to make the enterprise strong and take risks with some of our institutions? I choose the latter. And so after the rupture, we are in an era of disruption. And so, again, talking about the Royal Society, the reason I was there in January is because we were celebrating the one-year anniversary of this report that we put out called Science Diplomacy in an Era of Disruption with Mark Walpert and his team. And this is an effort to say, what does that look like? How do you build the structures for nuclear non-proliferation for AI in a world where the infrastructure for AI doesn't sit in nation states? It sits in corporations. Corporations with their own foreign policy. Those are not national champions. They are corporations with their own statecraft. And so it means for scientific societies, and this is where I get to the prompt that was actually given to me, what are you supposed to do as a scientific society? It means that we have to be building bridges. We have to show up. The United States is not a monolith. The United States is actually an incredibly diverse nation with 350 million people and all kinds of ideas. And showing up, and sometimes in track 2 diplomacy, in Cuba, in North Korea. The reason we put the Swiss ambassadors, I can't say where that actually took place. These are the kinds of things that scientists have to be involved in sort of building that collaboration. But now, in this new world, it can't just be with these places where we have difficult geopolitical relationships. It has to be with our allies and our friends as well. And so if the Royal Society has that meeting, I'd be glad to attend because I think it's incredibly valuable. You know, I showed this picture. Oops. Make sure I get it. On the same day, you can tell I'm wearing the same tie, I had the privilege of meeting the Secretary of State and the ambassador from China at the same day. And the message was the same, which is that future generations are watching both of you. They're watching both of you. We have choices to make as nation states on what this world is going to look like. And as scientists, we have agency to influence what those decisions are. We chose to make a trip to Cuba and meet the president of Cuba. Now, I only do this when I've told the State Department exactly what I'm doing, because I don't want to get in trouble. But that's the key, is to say the same things to everybody. And so I am perfectly willing to speak out against the administration. And I have been, and it's landed me on Fox News. I was called a woke CEO. Now, here's the 2 quotes that were taken from me at our annual meeting. The first was that RFK Jr. was not the right person to lead the HHS. I stand by that quote if this is being recorded. I stand by that quote. There's no need for clarity. The second was that unequivocally, science has no borders. Unequivocally, science has no borders. That is the other thing that's attacked for being said. We have to be able to say that, and I'm willing to say it in any room, any place. So you have to be able to say the same things over and over. As scientists, I think that's key. We can't be the politicians. We have to be the ones who say the same thing in every room. You say the same thing in every room. It means going to Hong Kong, or this is Tokyo actually, and being on NHK, which I still don't know exactly what we said. But you can tell that you probably know that chart. That's the Pew chart on trust in science in America. They're worried about it as much as we are. I'll bring you to the idea that these problems that we have are still global. Mosquitoes in Iceland are a problem. The same water touches Havana that touches Miami. The same mosquitoes flying around central Cuba are flying around Louisiana. But I'm an optimist born of evidence, and these are some reasons why. The smallpox vaccine is one of those because of the fact that we can eradicate something like smallpox. But let me tell you this. We have every tool we need right now to eradicate hepatitis C, to eradicate cervical cancer, and to eradicate HIV, if we wanted to. We have every tool. We don't need another discovery to do it. It's policy and politics that are required. But we did it during the 70s. Why can't we do it now? The other thing I'll show you is that Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. If that hadn't been signed, I wouldn't be here. We have reasons to be optimistic. We've done challenging things before. And there's good news on those graduate fellows. This year, there's a record number. And I give credit to Michael Kratsios, who is the science advisor of the president. It was his doing that made that number go up. And so when credit is due, I give it. And I'll just end with this, which is, are we going to meet this moment as leaders, or are we going to let others define this for us? And as scientists, I think we have to do that. I think it is our responsibility as the inheritors of the Enlightenment to be the ones who are willing to speak up and say things. And so I'll continue to testify to Congress. I will continue to make statements to the press, and I hope you will too. Thank you.
Important. Let me ask our other speakers to come up and join me up here at the table, and I think we'll be asking questions of everyone. So we'll start with the first question for you, I think, and get things going in our roundtable. Actually, I will take the privilege of asking the first question. Oh. We need...
Oh, there it is.
Here we are. Ah, okay. Thank you. Please join us.
Thanks.
And thank all of you so much for your talks and all of your efforts. And so really my first question is, what do we do? How do we get out of this? How do we restore the trust? The trust of the community, the trust of other nations. That Fulbright story is just shocking. How can we learn from other countries? What can we do to change this?
You're giving me that one to start? I wish there was a short answer. I don't think there is a short answer. I think it is a long-term prospect of work that we have in front of us. And that's about building relationships again. There's no ad campaign that you can do to convince people to trust you. Pharma tried it. They spent $500 million, and they're less trusted than they were before the ad campaign. And so it's not about advertising or that sort of thing. It is a long-term prospect to change the culture of how we, as scientists, interact with our communities. I think that one of the things I worry about is when I look at granular polling data around universities, I realize that they're less popular the closer you get to the university. That's a scary thing. It's a scary thing. And it tells you that the relationship directly with the population of that community is tough. And so where were the folks to speak out when Harvard and Columbia were under attack? Where were the people who were outside of academia to speak out? There weren't any. There weren't any. And so I think that requires us showing up in those communities. And it doesn't mean showing up as, let me tell you about Uracil classicales, which is what I happen to know about. It's showing up and talking about the fact that you are a scientist and you care about the same thing. So at AAAS, we have programs to build relationships with faith leaders across the world, across the United States. And that's a long-term relationship building. And some of them don't agree with us. Some of them think that the world is 6,000 years old. But I tell them that our job is not to change your religion. My job is to say, on Monday, you need to learn evolution because evolution makes predictions. And if you want to help us cure Alzheimer's and diabetes, then you've got to understand that framework. I'm not going to change their religion. I don't think I could win that battle. Now, there's a disagreement among scientists. Some would disagree with me. But I have this feeling that we have to win that battle first, then we can get to the rest.
Yes, it is on.
Please.
I think we have to examine, first of all, have we really lost trust in the way that sometimes we talk about? Because we can talk ourselves into a problem that maybe isn't quite here. Now, I can tell you what it is in UK. Science is one of the most trusted activities.
Here as well.
And that is, as far as I'm aware, the same in the US. Now, the reason I say that is that there could be a position that those of a certain political opinion don't like some of the scientific conclusions we come to. So they politicize it by saying that we don't trust the science. Now, I actually think most moderate politicians on the left or the right or the liberal do trust science, but the extremists don't, on the left or the right. And I think I would reformulate it a little bit in trust as to, because I think we are in danger of having it forced upon us by certain political opinions. I mean, and we need sort of greater clarity about that. So that's just one thing I'd say. Okay. But we can't assume that we'll always have trust, if I can put it this way, so we always have to work on it. So I still think it's a valid question, but I don't think we should, I'm back to saying we shouldn't get into despair again. We should just identify what the problem is. But we need, therefore, to communicate with the public. And I think there's several things to be said about that. Scientists have to be seen as human beings and part of society. And that means you need certain sorts of people to talk to them as if they, who know that. And I mean, not all scientists are like that. In fact, I despair a bit when we try and say every student should be doing public outreach, when 95% of scientists I wouldn't let near the public, to be perfectly honest. But the 5% who you do, you really should encourage. So I think we have to be a bit more savvy about quite how we do it. But we have to talk to them as if we are human beings. So don't go on the television wearing the white coats. That's they always tell you, go on wearing the white coats. I mean, it's stupid. I mean, it really is stupid because they think, who are these people in white coats? I could go on, but I'm going to give it to you. Oh, no, you've got a mic.
Well, I agree with everything being said. I think communication is the ultimate key, as we know that people's attention span is getting shorter and shorter with this TikTok of the short videos. If you can't explain the key concept in 5 seconds, you're doomed. And that goes against the progress of science. Science becomes much, much more complicated. You cannot use simple words to explain anymore. So we have to work much harder, that's all. And I don't think it's impossible, but we have to spend time working on that. And also working with social scientists, working with artists, working with the communication experts, find out what works, what doesn't. That's the only way. We just have to do the hard work.
Do you think, I mean, because you're right, I mean, we're all told to say it all in 15 seconds or something.
Right.
I mean, are you saying we should try and say it in 15 seconds, or should we try and devise a circumstance where at least we have 90 seconds? Or,
both. I think we just have to do whatever we can. Some things that I think that scientists typically has a tendency trying to explain things in full.
Right.
And if you want to explain everything in full, it takes hours.
It's not going to work.
Okay? But if you want to make one point clear, then it could be shorter. And that's an art. How do we divide that into small segments? Divide and then we can conquer.
Paul, I think it's an all of the above, though, because I think that there are moments to use the algorithms to have things on TikTok and elsewhere. But to build trust actually requires long form. You don't build, there's not trust in it. There's influence in that, but there's not trust in that. And so long form, and there are long form podcasts that many of our scientists participate in that are actually quite good and actually reach a large large number of people. In-person relationships as well. So I don't think that we should limit ourselves to say, okay, we have to use the algorithmic technologies that we have today. There are some of our young people who are very good at it. I'm not.
And can I add just one more thing? The BBC have done a survey of what people like to watch and listen to. And one of the most popular things is science. It is science. And the reasons they say it, because they say it's the only cheerful thing around. I think we should build on that.
We should build on that. There's joy in science.
Well, you know, the other part of science is accuracy. Is talking about things that are correct and really being a repository for things that are correct. With the internet and everything going on now, there's so much out there that's not correct. And how do we make that distinction, get around that?
Well, there's one aspect I wanted to bring up. In old days, science is very pure. Scientists just do science. These days, scientists are not that quote-unquote pure. Many of the scientists also have another hat.
That's right.
The entrepreneur.
That's right.
So when you talk about something, people will think, are you self-serving? Are you selling your stock?
That's fair.
Are you selling your products? Why are you saying this? Because benefit your company. So that's one of the major reasons that people develop this distrust of scientists.
That's fair. That's very fair.
There's a question.
Yes, some questions from here. I'm sorry. Someone with a mic.
Yeah, Rich Schiffer in Indiana University. It would be nice if the leaders of our society were interested in using the benefits of the lessons of science to benefit society and its members. However, there's every reason to believe that the present government that we have and certain other governments around the world are interested in accumulating power and using it to benefit themselves and their friends. And not only that, they've learned to weaponize misinformation and the tools of modern society to convince the members of society they're acting in their best interests and convince voters to vote against their own best interests. And those of us in the social sciences who have tried to look at ways to combat this have found it's difficult. It's a very modest ability to change, cause change. And what worries me is that the only hope for real change is that our horrible leaders will cause such ills for society that we'll get rid of them.
There you go.
Without getting rid of the rest of us at the same time.
Would someone like to comment? Or we've got another question? Harvey.
Yes, Larry Einhorn, also
sorry.
Indiana University. So great session, thank you very much. And talking about the rupture, maybe I'm misremembering, but 60 years ago, I didn't see anyone against the Salk vaccine for polio compared to what we're dealing now with COVID. And talking about COVID, there was a time in our hospital where we were healthcare heroes, and now we're piranhas. When someone refuses to wear a mask in the ICU, seeing a patient with an infectious disease, you hear over the loudspeaker a behavior alert, bringing in the campus police to get this person out of the room without causing disruption. Any comments about that, please?
You know, I wish I had answers for that. You know, I don't have an answer. I'm a lowly biochemist. What I'll tell you is that we, in that period of time, I can't go back to the Salk vaccine. I can go back to the 1917 pandemic and just reading bits and pieces about that. And it did cause social upheaval. And it had ramifications going further. There are historians in this room who can correct me if I'm wrong. And so we're looking at a break like that. I don't, you know, if you look at the safety profile for the first polio vaccine, it wasn't great. And so it actually, if you wanted to get mad about something, you probably should have gotten mad about the first polio vaccine. It's not about the data, it's not about the reality, it's about the perception. And I think we have to work harder to understand how we can change that perception. I think one of the biggest pieces of news this week has been the data coming back on the mRNA vaccines on pancreatic cancer, and how that has caused really hard questioning of Fred McAree, not Fred, whatever his name is, the FDA commissioner, the NIH director, and the secretary of HHS. Those are tough questions when you say, why did you cancel $500 million worth of research in something that shows this promise? And the answers are really, you have to really go out of your way hard to believe them.
Harvey Feinberg. I wanted to first say how many fascinating points have been raised by all of these talks. It's been marvelous. And Sir Paul, I wanted to address a question to you, reflecting back on the Thatcher years and the radical cuts to university and to science through the 1980s that were introduced. Were there any strategies other than welcome riding to the rescue that served the interests of science and universities in the UK at that time? And do you think there are any lessons from the experience or emerging from it that may be relevant to us today in the US?
Yes, I of course lived through the Thatcher days. They were not like the Trump days here. I mean, what Thatcher herself was a scientist. She cut back on funding, but did not eliminate it, and did something else actually, which I didn't fully recognize till I had to write a report on it. that what she actually cut most was government-funded research directly in institutes. I mean, you had that category up there. Yes. So to get it out of government. So there used to be many research institutes that did various things. They were all cut. What she actually then did was said all research should be in the universities. And as a consequence of that is that we now have a rather asymmetrical research funding where over 80% of all research is in universities, only about 15% in institutes. And of course, I run an institute and set one up, so I'm rather more keen on seeing more in institutes. So I think it was a bit different from, there were definitely cuts, but it was mainly government-funded research. Now, I'm observing what's happening here from afar. I mean, I think part of the attack on science and NSF and NIH was just to get rid of staff in government. I mean, the way that Musk got rid of maybe it was a bit overstaffed. I mean, but they didn't do it in any way sensible way. They just did it a typical HR way. What's the easiest people we can sack? Yeah. They didn't sort of make judgments on it. So I think quite a lot of it was driven by just getting government-supported, funded salaries down in some way. I mean, the people being supported. So I actually think the Thatcher days were a bit different to what we're seeing here. Now, I do think, observing that, if I can make a comment, that gradually I do think the reputation is going to be eroded of the government if it continues doing this. And I think you were remarking on that. Gradually that's going to come out. There will always be 30% of the population that you won't touch, but 30% isn't enough for this to carry on. So I think we have a responsibility to constantly drip feed and push back at every opportunity. And to go back to what I said, do not despair, just constantly push back and undermine it. And treat it what it is. It is a case of extremism. You know, it's not right or left. What we're looking at is extreme politics, just based on opinions, rather than evidence and debate and careful thinking.
Paul, if I could add to that, showing up matters. Showing up matters. There was a hearing. So the AAAS testified 3 times last year. I testified twice, and Holden Thorpe testified once. The one hearing that Holden testified at, Holden's the editor-in-chief of Science. They invited the editors-in-chief of Nature, The Lancet, and Science. Now, those are not, they may seem similar, but they are not the same. Our lawyers all told us not to go. There was no upside to going to a hearing on COVID in front of a House committee. And so our 2 commercial colleagues did not go. The editor-in-chief of Nature and the editor-in-chief of Lancet did not go. We made the decision against our lawyers' wishes to go because somebody needed to go and talk about science. And you know what happened? Nothing. Nothing happened because we prepared. We spent a lot of money on preparation and lawyers to get ready and have conversations with the staff. And then we went to the hearing, and it was a learning session on how scientific publication works and what is the review process for a paper. And you never heard about it because there was no viral moment from it. But if we hadn't gone, there'd be 3 empty spots where they would say, raise your right hand, nobody's there. In fact, they had 2 empty chairs and 1 person there. Showing up matters, and so we as a scientific community have to do that.
Question over here. There are a lot of questions.
Yes, I'm Jeffrey Parker. I teach at The Ohio State University. If you read your New York Times today, you'll know a lot more about The Ohio State University than you did yesterday. But one of the things they missed from the story is that we introduced AI as a requirement.
Just hold it a little closer to your mouth.
Okay. Not many people ask me to do that. We decided in our wisdom that every student would become AI literate starting this year. So we've had innumerable seminars on how to deal with it in the classroom. I teach history. And the first time I understood what it was all about was in James Liao's presentation today, so thanks for that. But what came up in our discussions was the students are terrified of accusations of plagiarism. So they won't use it. And in fact, some of our colleagues have gone back to blue books for exams at the request of the students. Oh, and as a footnote, you can always vote with your feet, Professor Nurse. That's what I did under Margaret Thatcher. That's why I'm at the Ohio State University and not at where I was before in Scotland.
Others? Right here. Thank you.
Frank Stewart, New York. If I understood rightly, Professor Liao said that AI doesn't yet have motivation, but I've read reports of AI showing quite a lot of cunning in preserving itself. It does seem to be motivated by self-preservation if you put it in the right real or imagined situation.
Yeah, I think human can program AI to do things that seemingly resemble humans' behavior. What I was talking about was that there's no true motivation or true understanding. Okay, what constitutes human motivation may be different from what constitutes machine motivation. You can program AI to behave like human, can show empathy, okay, but it's not really empathy. And that distinction, when is that distinction going to disappear? This is a philosophical question we all need to think about.
My understanding is that these machines weren't programmed to be self-preserving. This was
something that developed in the course of playing around with them.
Yeah, but that motivation typically is associated with survival. A human motivation is a lot more than survival. Okay, why we work so hard? It's not because we don't survive. We want to achieve something. Okay, your grad students, why do they work hard? It's not because they will be flunked. It was because they wanted to work hard. And where does that sense of pride come from? Okay, that's the bottom line of modern day motivation in human beings, not just survival. And for AI to get to that point may take some time. Eventually it may get there, but at this point, I don't think it's there yet. Maybe very soon.
Can I ask a question of James? Because this was the clearest exposition I've heard of AI and the problems with it. I thought it was a great talk. One thing I've wondered is AI good at asking questions of agency? What I find it's good at answering questions, but asking the right questions, which is where the creative side really in science often comes from, is I wonder whether it is actually managing to cope with that. Do you have a view on this?
Right. It is true that AI can answer questions very well. It doesn't raise questions very well. Occasionally, if you play with AI, today's AI, occasionally it will raise some question that you think, hey, this is good. And sometimes if you give the wrong prompt, it will come back to ask you, are you talking about this? What about that? It will actually do that. Okay, for simple things, yes. But not to the level of what we scientists call asking a good question or the right question. No, not at that level. But simple things, classification. You spell things wrong, you ask questions not logical, not consistent with your previous question, you'll come back to ask you, do you mean this? Okay, yeah, you experience that.
But I mention it only because I suspect that's a significant contribution to creativity in the scientific endeavor.
Right.
Absolutely. We have another question from the balcony.
Bob Hauser, University of Wisconsin-Madison. My understanding is that, and I'm sort of prompted by my friend James's comment about the necessity of the social behavioral sciences working with other sciences as this evolution goes forward. My understanding is that the Directorate for Social Behavioral and Economic Sciences at the National Science Foundation is really under attack. It's been zeroed out in the proposed administration budget, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's gone. but my understanding is that an effort is now actively underway to dismantle it and eliminate it so that there'll be nothing to fund if funding is available. And I'm wondering what the current status of that is and what folks like us can do about it. Thank you.
I can speak to that a little bit. Yes, that is happening. So the administration last year also proposed to get rid of it. The Congress put it back, and in fact, the Congress put back almost all of NSF's funding. This year, in the president's budget, it's proposed to be gone again. And what's happened is they've tried to go ahead and instill the president's budget, even though the Congress had appropriated more money. And that is, we're starting to get into bigger questions than just science and science implementation. We're getting into questions of checks and balances within our federal system. And so there is an active ongoing campaign amongst social science organizations, and the AAAS is also involved in speaking to the key members of Congress who put that money back to have them speak up. And they're bipartisan. Remember, those bills were written by Republicans last year. So having those folks speak up is what we'd like to do. Those folks on the NSF are people like Dale Strong of Alabama, who's the vice chair in the House side for the committee that funds NSF. In the Senate, it's Jerry Moran of Kansas. If you happen to be from one of those places, please go speak to your congressperson.
And
Hi, Howard Gardner from Cambridge, Mass. I think probably everybody here would agree it would be good if the population of this country understood science better than it does. But my question, we have three different societies represented here. Is there any good evidence that the public understanding of science actually contributes to its support, or is it more the public's just trust of the leaders? I mean, if you actually ask the population to explain anything about science, even in non-technical language, they'd be able to do it, because it's important to know how to repair the certain situation and the role of science education as opposed to trust in our leadership. Thank you.
I've got some comments to make, not so much in the US situation, which others could do, but generally I think one of the better ways of building trust is by emphasizing the good it's done to people. And so that is, I think, a winner. The more complicated aspect of that is that it's easier to make that case for something which is directly leading to improvement, say in healthcare or whatever. And it's more difficult to explain that often those advances are built on other things that might be working with fruit flies or something, which nobody sort of quite gets. So I think that in building our trust, we have to actually make the case for the whole ecosystem from discovery to application. Yeah. Focus on the application, but say that the application arose from often rather unusual situations and experiments in which isn't so obvious to them. And I think if you connect all of it together, I think that's better. If you just focus, so you do need to focus on what it is for the public good, but if you only do the direct public good, you lose the part which actually allows that public good to be delivered. But you might have something to say about the US situation.
Yeah, I'm okay. It reminds me of a story, actually. You know, when I got this job as executive publisher of Science, you know, there's still a print magazine, and I thought, oh, my mom will really like to see my name in the masthead, right? So I got my mom a subscription to Science magazine. My mom is not a scientist. My mom worked in factories her whole life, and it went to North Carolina. And it would get on her coffee table, and the first couple of issues, she thought it was pretty cool. And then at the end of the year, I went home for Christmas, and she said, you know, Sudip, we don't really need that anymore. It's just piling up in the New Yorker. And it wasn't because she needed to read science and read the news section of Science or anything like that. She trusts science because she knows me as a scientist. And I think that's a lot of it. Is that, you know, if you get to know these three folks, you're going to say, yes, I actually like them. I trust them. They have grandchildren. They have children. They're not out to hurt me. And I think there's a lot to be said about relationship building in that way. The other part is in how you talk about science. You know, you mentioned accuracy. I always talk about the fact that we're taught to be accurate and precise as scientists, right? That's why we use jargon. But when you're talking to the public,
Right.
you're actually losing the battle by being precise. Sometimes you just have to be accurate. And so that sometimes means metaphor. It sometimes means saying things like this. When I testified to the Senate Appropriations Committee, I didn't talk about the fact that we identified genes for cystic fibrosis. I said, at a meeting of the Cystic Fibrosis Association, I met a grandmother who has cystic fibrosis. That's a freaking miracle.
Yeah.
It just is. Because those folks that had those genes should have died in their teens or their early 20s. And it's a miracle there's someone that's old enough, a young grandmother, but still old enough to be a grandmother, who has cystic fibrosis. And then you can talk about that all came from an appropriations bill. A member of Congress gets some credit for the fact that there is a miracle that happened through the, God's hand seen through the hand of or through the pipette of a scientist. That's a pretty extraordinary thing. Being able to talk in those terms in a way that is relatable, I think is helpful. It's not the end of the story, though. I really believe relationship building is more important than telling a story.
And being a human being, as you said.
And being a human being.
It reminds me of, I was in a room with Neil Lane once, and Neil said, scientists are a lot like people. Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to have to bring this to a close. But in doing so, before we end, I want to hearken back to your first slides of the extraordinary science that's going on today and the beauty associated with that and the opportunity associated with that. So let's all listen to Paul and push back and make sure we can go forward with AI and all else and do some extraordinary science. So thank
Jackie.
you very much.
Thank you.
No.
And with that, before anybody steps away, we have several announcements. The first of which is that council meeting will be right after this, over across the street. But I'll turn this all over to Roger.
We began the session by commemorating the members who have died since our last meeting. We will close with a slightly more upbeat commemoration, mentioning those who are here at this meeting who have been members of the APS for a significant period of time. With first some nice round numbers, those who were elected 10 years ago. So I'll read these names and then ask you to hold applause and give them all a big round of applause at the end. So the elections of 2016, celebrating 10 years of membership, Joanna Eisenberg, Ron Fairman, Ellen Harris, Michael Marletta, Roger Smith, and Alan Spradling. And then we have some 20 years of membership. Howard Gardner, Mike Hout, Linda Kerber, Gene Likens, and Peter Wolins. And then we have a smaller number who are celebrating 30 years or more. Jerry Sabloff and Alan Blinder, 30 years each. Joel Cohen, 32 years. Pat McPherson, a mighty 43 years. And Torsten Wiesel, 44 years. So congratulations to all. And now Patrick will give us our marching orders.
All right, now we're good. I always hate to be the person standing between you and the bar. Good news is the bar doesn't open until 6. So I want to tell you what we're going to do before that time. So this is the end of the session. The museum over in Philosophical Hall is open, and we have some private tours if you want to see it, some docents there. The exhibition called These Truths, the Declarations of Independence, has 19 first printings and early facsimiles of the Declaration of Independence. It's thought to be the largest collection of first printings and early facsimiles ever mounted in one location at one time, all of which come from our collection. So I want you to know you can spend some of your time doing that. But for getting to where we need to go tonight, I want to give you a little bit of a rundown. So we are going, the National Constitution Center, thanks to Jeff Rosen, a new APS member, is going to give us a private tour of their exhibition starting at 5 o'clock. At 5:40, they have scheduled a private viewing of their special theatrical performance in the Freedom's Rising Theater. So if you can make sure you get to the National Constitution Center by 5:40 so you can see that private performance for APS members and our guests and our friends, that would be great. To get to the National Constitution Center, it's just 2 blocks up 5th Street. You can't miss it. It's the large gray building opposite Independence Hall. It's an easy walk for those that like to walk. I understand the weather's turned. It's really nice out. But we also have buses that are going to be running in a constant loop starting at 4:50 out on the corner of 5th and Chestnut. So right opposite the Monaco, we have buses that are going to run all night starting at 4:50. So to give you a rundown of the timing again, you have until 5:40. It would be great if you could be at the National Constitution Center at 5:40 for a private viewing of the performance in Freedom's Rising. And then at 6 o'clock, the reception, cocktails, and food will begin. So thank you all for a great day today, and I hope to see you tonight at the Constitution Center.
Council.
Council is meeting at 4:30, and also for those that want, after the Constitution Center, to continue conversations, there will be a bar open at the Monaco in the basement. That's called the Nightcap Mingle. It's in your program, so also consider seeing each other there.